All right, so welcome to another deep dive. We love it when you guys send in stuff that you're finding interesting online, and then we get to kind of take a deep dive into it and pull out some of the key insights. And this time around, we got a really fun one. Someone sent us a YouTube transcript.
Yeah.
And it is from the Comedy Shorts channel, and it's Andrew Schulz reacting to Ashton Hall's viral Get Ready With Me video. I think the specific title is Andrew Schulz, RESETS to Ashton Hall viral GRWM W Charlamagne.
Exactly. That's the one.
So what's our mission here today? What are we trying to figure out in this deep dive?
Well, I think what's so fascinating about this particular video is that we have, a comedian like Andrew Schulz reacting to a wellness influencer's morning routine. And it kind of begs the question, like, what is it about this that has captured people's attention online? And I think in order to really understand that, we're going to have to take a look at, what are the specific elements of Ashton Hall's routine that have gotten people talking? What's the skepticism around it? And, what are the different angles that Andrew Schulz and Charlamagne bring to the discussion?
Okay, so let's jump right into Schultz's initial reaction because it's pretty telling. He pretty much flat out says that when this whole Ashton Hall thing first kind of popped up on his radar, his first thought was like, and I'm paraphrasing here, like, why the fuck do I care about this guy's morning routine?
Right.
And he even mentions that Ashton Hall is clearly in great shape. Like, he calls him jacked, like that's not even enough to kind of hook him initially.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Like, what do you think is going on there?
Well, I think it just goes to show you just how much content we're bombarded with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Even something as like visually impressive as somebody's physique, it has to really compete for our attention. And so I think that initial kind of reaction from Schulz really begs the question of, what was it about this particular video that kind of broke through all the noise?
Yeah.
Really suggests that there had to be something, whether it was the content itself.
Yeah.
Was there something surprising? Was there an element of novelty, or was there even maybe a strategy behind it, that helped this thing really gain traction?
And strategy is actually exactly where they go next.
Wow.
They start talking about this idea of a strategic rollout, and they're noticing how it seemed like a bunch of publications online were kind of covering this Ashton Hall thing all at the same time.
Right.
And they even mentioned this idea of astroturfing and how that can potentially turn into what they call real turfing.
Right.
So can you kind of unpack those concepts for us? Like, what are they getting at?
Yeah. So, what's really fascinating here is that they're suggesting that maybe the initial wave of attention for this video wasn't totally organic.
Mm-hmm.
And the term astroturfing essentially means like creating this fake impression of like widespread support or interest for something.
Okay.
And so their theory is that if you get, several different online platforms to kind of cover something at the same time, even if it's, maybe prompted a little bit, it creates this perception that there's this like widespread buzz about something. And, as they point out, if that initial push does actually capture some genuine interest and people start organically talking about it and sharing it, then, that manufactured buzz can kind of morph into what they're calling real turfing, which basically means like, okay, now it's actually caught on and people are genuinely interested in this.
Got it.
So, it really highlights the fact that the initial spark of something going viral, it might be engineered in some way.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think twice about what you see trending online. What's really going on behind the scenes. Okay, so to understand what exactly was being amplified, in this whole strategic rollout idea, the transcript mentions Ashton Hall's stated mission.
Okay.
And it says that he's someone who has dedicated his career to encouraging others to prioritize their health, and he shares his wellness journey online.
Yeah.
So he's not just some random dude, he's presenting himself as a health and wellness influencer. So does that change anything for knowing that that's kind of his stated purpose?
It absolutely does. I mean, I think it provides really important context because, if we understand that he is presenting himself as this kind of guide in the realm of health and wellness, then this a subsequent conversation about his specific practices, takes on a whole other level of relevance. I mean, his audience is presumably looking to him for, advice, inspiration for their own well-being. And so you can imagine that any kind of unusual or, eyebrow-raising element that he throws into his routine is going to generate a much stronger reaction, whether it's intrigue or skepticism or even just amusement versus, if it was just some random person sharing their, quirky habits.
Okay, so speaking of quirky habits, the conversation really takes off when they start talking about this recent change to his morning routine that he says has improved it.
Yeah.
And the two things that they highlight specifically are him putting his face in water and rubbing a banana on his head.
Wow.
And, I mean, come on, those are pretty out there, right?
Yeah.
What was your initial reaction when you heard about these practices?
Well, I mean, my first thought was that they're certainly unconventional, right? And I think that's probably a big part of why this video got so much attention. You know, in a space like the wellness space where there's already so much content, you know, doing something that's noticeably different is kind of a tried and true way to stand out. You know, and even the way they talk about it, you know, the face in water thing, you know, it's almost like, well, yeah, maybe that's supposed to be invigorating. But, you know, Charlamagne immediately kind of juxtaposes that with his own approach, which is just like, you know, bring the water to his face,
Right.
which kind of highlights, you know, the novelty, if not the impracticality of Hall's method.
Yeah, it's like, why wouldn't you just, cup the water in your hands and splash it on your face?
Right, exactly.
And then the banana on the head. I mean, Schultz's reaction to that is so funny. He even jokes about how, like, that wouldn't fly in his neighborhood.
Yeah.
But, beyond the humor, they're pretty clearly expressing disbelief. They call it crazy. They call it stupid.
So is there any, like, established wellness practice that, that involves rubbing a banana on your head?
As far as I know, and I've done, my fair share of research in the wellness world, I'm not aware of any, like, widely recognized or scientifically validated practice that involves, like, rubbing a banana on your scalp. I mean, bananas are obviously very nutritious, and sometimes, people use them in DIY beauty treatments for, like, hair or skin,
Right.
But, yeah, this definitely seems to be veering into the territory of the unexpected, and, I think it's highly likely that that's a big part of why this video went viral, just the sheer surprise factor of it. Right, it's like, okay, I gotta see this.
Exactly.
Okay, so then they move on to another interesting visual detail, and that's that he's got tape on his lip.
Right.
Which they correctly identify as mouth tape, and it's actually used for promoting nasal breathing during sleep.
Yeah.
They even kind of throw out a less conventional, more humorous potential use for it.
Yeah.
But so what's the significance of this detail in the bigger picture of their conversation?
Well, I think the mouth tape adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing, right? I mean, on the one hand, nasal breathing while you sleep is something that, people say has health benefits. It's linked with better sleep quality and potentially even better oxygen intake. But, when you add that to an already pretty unusual routine, I think it just kind of amplifies people's reactions. And then, of course, the commentators have to kind of throw in their own, humorous take on it, which, further fuels the discussion and kind of takes it beyond just like, oh, here's a health tip.
Yeah.
It's like now we're getting into speculation and lighthearted mockery,
Yeah.
And I think it shows how even something that, could be seen as beneficial can still become, fodder for online discussion and kind of commentary, depending on how it's presented and the context around it.
Yeah, for sure. So in the midst of all the amusement and the skepticism about his routine, there is this recurring acknowledgement of Ashton Hall's insane body. They keep saying he's jacked.
Yeah.
Schulz even compares him to D'Angelo in the How Does It Feel video.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of implies that Hall's physique might be a central factor in the attention that he's getting. So what do you make of that comparison?
Yeah, I think the D'Angelo comparison is actually quite astute.
Yeah.
Because if you think back to that video, D'Angelo's physique was undeniably a major focal point, and it really contributed to the video's popularity and, its cultural impact.
Right.
And so what Schulz is suggesting is that Ashton Hall's, equally impressive physique might be doing something similar here. That it's drawing viewers in, almost regardless of what the specifics of the morning routine are.
Okay.
And, I think the underlying idea there is that in a visual medium like online video, like, physical appearance can be a really, really powerful and attention-grabbing element. And it could even potentially make seemingly bizarre practices, more palatable or at least more watchable.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's like even if people are initially clicking because it's like, oh, the banana on the head guy, they're still seeing someone who clearly embodies, this really high level of physical fitness.
Right. But then Charlamagne raises a really good point. He's like, Ashton Hall's not the first fitness coach to share his routine.
Right.
So that kind of begs the question, like, what was it about this particular instance that made it go viral?
Right. I mean, that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because, like Charlamagne points out, the internet is absolutely saturated with, fitness influencers sharing their morning rituals, their workout regimens. And so The fact that this particular video resonated, to this degree suggests that there's this confluence of factors, and it's probably not just the physique because, like I said, there's tons of people online with, impressive physique, and it's probably not just the wellness mission because, again, that's also a pretty common theme.
Right.
So I think, those kind of unique and somewhat bizarre elements that we've been talking about, the face in water, the banana, the mouth tape, those things undoubtedly played a role in making this content really stand out and spark all this discussion, and whether that discussion was positive or negative or just like bewildered. Right.
It still got people talking. And then, you later on top of that, the possibility of a coordinated initial push like they were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, maybe that was the catalyst that kind of amplified it and helped it reach a wider audience.
Okay, so ultimately, Schulz seems to settle on this very, pragmatic view of the whole thing, and he basically frames it as like, hey, this is just a hustle.
Right.
And he pretty much says, and paraphrasing slightly here, I'm not mad at anyone for what they do online. If you can create content that goes viral, then do your thing.
Right.
So what's your takeaway from that final thought?
I think what Schulz is expressing there is kind of a realistic, maybe slightly cynical, but, a realistic view of how online content creation works in today's attention economy, right?
Yeah.
It's like everybody's vying for clicks and views and engagement, and so pushing boundaries and doing things differently, even if it seems unconventional or even absurd,
Yeah.
it can actually be a really effective strategy for achieving virality.
Yeah.
And I think what he's ultimately saying is like, hey, I acknowledge the effort that goes into creating content that grabs people's attention.
Yeah.
And I respect anyone who can successfully kind of navigate, this complex environment, regardless of the methods that they use.
Interesting.
It's almost like, a little peek behind the curtain of online fame,
Yeah.
and all the strange dynamics that go into it.
Okay, so just to kind of recap our deep dive into this whole YouTube reaction thing, we started with Andrew Schultz's initial skepticism towards Ashton Hall's morning routine. We then kind of explored these interesting theories about a potential strategic rollout, and, we touched on Hall's stated mission of being a wellness influencer.
Right.
And then, of course, we had to really dig into the unusual elements of the routine, the face in water, the banana on the head, the mouth tape, which all sparked a lot of amusement and disbelief.
For sure.
We also highlighted how much they kept mentioning Hall's impressive physique and, the big question of why this particular routine went viral when there are so many others out there. And then we ended on Schultz's kind of detached but pragmatic view of the whole thing as, just another example of the online hustle.
Exactly. And I think what we've really seen is how, a seemingly straightforward get ready with me video can actually open up this much wider conversation about, how attention is captured online, the mysterious nature of virality, and the different strategies that individuals and creators use to cut through all the noise.
So that brings us to our final thought for you guys.
Yeah.
Considering all the different angles that we've explored here today, the potential for a strategic rollout, the shock value of unconventional practices, the power of physical appearance, and just the sheer persistence of, maintaining an online presence. What do you think is the most significant factor in driving viral attention in today's digital world? Is it authenticity? Is it shock value? Or is it some combination of these things and maybe other elements that we haven't even considered? What determines what content explodes across our screens? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See ya.